Hello, hello. Welcome to Sit and See. I'm Dr. Jared Jones. My research specialties are ancient systems of meditation, the cognitive science of meditation, Buddhist philosophy, and the philosophy of science. Oh. So many words. I'm here today to once again tell you that I've been training in Buddhist meditation and Taoist meditation collectively for about 21 years, and have also gone down the academic route, studying meditation in terms of cognitive science, not as a scientist, mind you, but as a student of religion and philosophy, and also getting a PhD, looking at Buddhist philosophy at a relatively high level of detail, let's say. And it occurred to me about 5 years ago that there's just a huge amount of misinformation about meditation, and there's a lot of really good information about meditation out there, except a huge amount of it is really designed to work best in retreat. And for this reason, I decided that for better or worse, I would start teaching people about the techniques that I've learned from my teachers that hopefully work a little bit better in real life in the midst of the challenges of real life than the techniques that are mostly designed for retreat. So that's one aspect. Another aspect is, of course, those of you who've been around a bit know that I also started to make some content. So, as someone said today, hey, Data Daddy, welcome, welcome. As somebody pointed out today on a phone call, in the modern world, you have to deal with a lot of challenges. The meditation approach that I teach is from mostly Buddhism, a little bit of cognitive science, a little bit of Taoism. This is where I draw my information from. In terms of uh, in terms of the rest of the content I make, it's not simply sort of a secular approach or a universalist approach. It's mainly a Buddhist approach because I'm mainly a Buddhist, right? And so one of the things, if you're Buddhist, that you're dealing with in the modern world is that there are academics, there are theologians, there are random people on the internet. Even in some cases, there are Buddhists who are trying to convince you of all sorts of stuff that doesn't make a lot of sense, including a lot of stuff that isn't true about Buddhism. And it finally came to a head for me that whether I like it or not, I have relatively good arguments that make the Buddhist worldview hold together in a way that can be defended in the face, I think, of significant challenge on the part of secularists, on the part of materialists, on the part of theologians, all of whom would like you to believe what they believe, right? It's not as if anyone is totally standing on the sidelines as an objective observer to everything else. No, everybody has an axe to grind, even if they're an agnostic is saying, I want to convince you that we don't know enough to know about this subject and that therefore you shouldn't have an opinion. So even the agnostics, ironically, are trying to convince you to believe what they believe or to not believe what they don't believe, right? So in the face of all of this, I decided, you know what? I'm going to go out there. I'm going to start making response videos because I'm sure there are some people who have a little itch in the back of their brain because they saw this video or that video or this, that, and the other, or they read this thing over here and this other thing over there, and now they have no idea what to make of all of this. And if you'd like to be a Buddhist in the 21st century, one of the projects where you have all of your work ahead of you is figuring out rebirth, karma, cosmology as a Buddhist, etc., 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 etc. And then on top of this, you have to contend with the fact that your ontology, your epistemology, etc., are very, very difficult and sound like certain types of thought that we have in the West, but aren't those thoughts. So, yeah, because Buddhism is so complicated, I decided it might be best if I did my utmost for those who are interested in Buddhism to try to explain how some of these things hang together and form a cohesive system, because that cohesive system can, in fact, stand up to the challenges put forward by philosophical theology, for example. It is possible to be fully satisfied as a philosophical inclined person, or a philosophy inclined person, or a thinking person, that the this world that we live in is the result of an infinite causal sequence. If you understand all the moving parts of that argument, it's a very good argument. It does hold together. It can meet all of the challenges that it faces. And just like any other view, you end up with like one or two little areas where you go, well, I could go this way or that way on this aspect of it. But the same is true with theology, agnosticism, materialism, you name it. So, in brief, with my response videos, largely what I'm doing is debunking common misunderstandings of Buddhism, or responding to things I think it's important for Buddhists to understand, to be able to feel comfortable in their own skin as Buddhists living in the modern world. So, for those of you who are into that sort of thing, I'm working. My next video is going to be, as I said, I think yesterday, and might have been in this. I can't remember now if it was on a call or if it was in this class, but I'm going to be working on the Kalamas Sutta. I'll put it in the chat for those of you who don't know. So, this is a very, very famous sutta that has been utilized for a long time to pretend that Buddhism is making a certain kind of argument about truth that Buddhism never makes, can't make, cannot present and hold alongside all of the other claims that it makes for truth. And it's really important actually that you contextualize this particular sutta in the right way if you want to be satisfied with the rest of what you find in the Buddhist canon, because you won't if you misinterpret this one particular sutta that's quite popular. Some of you will already know it. When you read it in detail, as I will go in the upcoming video, it doesn't say what you think it does, and it doesn't say what probably the top 10 guys or girls that you've read in terms of interpreting the sutta, it doesn't say what they think it says either. And if you think it does, even that sutta itself will fall apart. If you take what that sutta says in the way that they want you to take it, the sutta itself collapses within its own absurdity. The sutta itself would be rendered meaningless by the interpretation that most modern interpreters try to put on it, which is why I don't think that's what that sutta means. So hopefully, we'll take a little journey together in the next week or so, exploring that particular sutta. So this is going to be part of a new series where I completely ruin Buddhism for everyone. No, it'll be part of the Buddhist PhD Response series where I'm addressing common misunderstandings once again, and yeah, hopefully it won't upset too many people. But this is one of those subjects that I think it's bound to make a few people angry, because this sutta is the reason that a lot of people accept Buddhism as kind of an interesting and worthwhile thing in the West, and it doesn't mean at all what people think it means, which has the potential to cause problems for some people. But Mazel tov. Yeah, what are you gonna do? You know? Okay. Let's see. Do we have questions about meditation, or shall I continue rambling on as I do before we get into our meditation techniques? One thing that's on my mind a little bit recently is breathing. I try not to spend too much time talking about this sort of thing because people then start adding it in to their practice in ways that make the practices not work. And so take it with a grain of salt. Ah, see? Here we go. Purple. Exactly right. Exactly right. Nobody notices this. Nobody notices this, but it is the basically a secular Buddhist interpretation. Although even some mainstream full-on religious Buddhists interpret it in a way that can't work. If you were to take their argument really seriously about the I don't want to say too much because I'm going to say a lot in the video, but about the approach that's being taken to that sutta, the first half of the sutta would completely destroy the second and third parts of the sutta. The first part of the sutta would render the rest of the sutta meaningless within a couple of paragraphs. So it can't mean what they say it means. It can't be interpreted the way they're interpreting it. In addition to this, if you interpret it the way as you just pointed out, Purple Guy, that mainly is sort of the big secular way of interpreting this sutta, which has really great importance for our practice, by the way. If you interpret it that way, you have to throw out hundreds, not like a couple, but hundreds of other Buddhist sources. Those sources, the way that they're written, would have to be thrown out completely. So either, if you interpret it the mainstream sort of way that you see all over the place, you either have to throw out hundreds of other sources because those sources now directly, not even indirectly or in a subtle way, but directly contradict that approach being described in the sutta if we interpret it in this way. So either we would have to throw away this sutta or we would have to throw away hundreds of other sources, which is why I suspect it doesn't mean um, what it is quite often interpreted to mean. There are a couple of academics who get relatively close to what I think is the correct way of seeing this sutta, contextualizing this sutta. And one of the big hints is who is the Buddha talking to? What is the audience for the sutta? What is the context of the conversation? What conversation are they having? Is a big clue, but I don't want to say too much more. It'll be probably by the end of the week that video will be up. So this will be the first in my new Buddhist PhD Responds by Ruining Your Idea of Buddhism Forever series. So the thing I wanted to bring up in terms of practice, and I will get to you, Oates. Welcome, Jay. Welcome, Oates. Welcome, Purple. Um, Virya's effort, right? Sorry, I learned quite a bit of my terminology in Tibetan and quite a bit of it in English, and then I don't know. I have several languages swimming around in my head. So I prefer just put things in English for the most part. Um, so one thing that's been on my mind quite recently is breathing. Yeah, energy, joyous effort. I believe is sometimes called. Let me make sure that's the right one. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay. Hey, Blue Eyes. Hope I don't interrupt. Had a message sent via school. Oh, let me double check. Wasn't that yesterday? Am I making that up? Sometimes school delays messages. Mm, because we didn't we speak? Did we speak yesterday, Blue Eyes? Because I know I have a call with someone after this class at 10 o'clock, but I think uh, I don't have any calls scheduled during the class. So if a message came through, it would have been probably delayed or whatever. Okay, sorry. Coming back to what we're doing, just quickly here. Yeah, 10 p.m. my time. My time. So it's Monday. Yeah, that's right. That's right. So it's my time Monday. So right now, so 9 o'clock is in a few minutes. 10 o'clock is in about an is just over an hour. Yes, yes. So that I think your timing's off just by a bit. Okay. So in terms of breathing, one of the things that happens when your concentration gets deeper is that your breathing gets slower. And as I was talking about with Neil Ripsky on the podcast, he mentioned, for example, that his teacher, even during ordinary activity, he would breathe about 2 times a minute. And yes, that's right. So for a normal adult, a normal healthy adult, uh, the breathing rate per minute is generally between 12 and 20 breaths per minute. So one of the interesting things is that if you train a lot, your breathing rate will go down as your mind gets more calm. And even when you're sleeping, I think let me double check. I think even when you're sleeping, yeah, it's still between 12 and 20. So think about this, right? Think about concentration. Your whole system, including your body, is getting so calm that your breathing rate can get down to sometimes my one of my teachers said that he knows somebody whose breath rate is one breath every 2 minutes. So another one of my teachers, Lama Jampa Shainman, who did a 3-year retreat, when he was doing part of that retreat, he was doing to generate concentration. He was using a breath retention practice, and he said that he got his breaths down to I think it was about 2 per minute doing that practice as well. So this is a fairly common thing. You find it in the Taoist circles, you find it in the Buddhist circles, uh, you find it in Hindu practices as well. So it's important to know that when you're one of the reasons that I don't talk about usually during the course is if you focus on your breath as an object and you get really good concentration, your breath will slow down so much that the breath becomes a really hard question. Sorry, a really hard object to use. Because if your breath gets down to 2 breaths a minute, it's very subtle. The sensations and stuff you're getting are very subtle on the nostril. And sometimes the breathing doesn't actually stop, but it gets so slow that sometimes your breath gets down to, one breath over the course of 4 minutes or 5 minutes. And so the idea that you're going to, uh, the idea that you're going to follow your breath when it's one breath in for 2.5 minutes, one breath out for 2.5 minutes becomes a little bit sort of questionable, right? Whether or not you're with that subtlety of movement without stirring the mind up because you're looking for the sensation. It's an open question whether or not you're going to be able to do that. And so breath practice, pranayama practice, for this reason, is maybe not the best practice to take into the long run for your training and concentration. It's good for a certain stage, but I don't know how much of this I want to say. Sorry, I know I'm fumbling a bit, but I'm debating with myself about how much to say. Um, I know people who can get their breath down very consistently. Well, I know of at least one person who can get their breath down very consistently to 2 breaths per minute, very easily, like not a big struggle or anything. And if your breath gets that subtle, it's not, it's because your concentration is pretty good. You don't really need to use the breath as a support, and the breath isn't the best object to use anymore at that stage. So some people, I think, have probably wondered, well, why, in some lineages you go with the breath and you go a long distance with the breath. But usually in those systems, there's a lot more steps and stages as to what you're doing with the breath so that it stays a good object. And then at some point you're transitioning from the breath straight to mental content and then the mind, or, like there are stages where you're moving off the breath finally and onto other stuff. So, for those of you who are interested from a theoretical standpoint, why do I do this 5 minute practice in the beginning? There's all sorts of reasons. One of the reasons is that if your concentration gets quite good, your breathing could slow down so much that you think you've stopped breathing for periods of time. And the breath can become very, very subtle. And the sensations on the skin can be very, very hard to feel because the breath is so slow. So this is one reason that the breath isn't maybe isn't the best object to use in the long run, if that makes sense. It has a place in your training, and this I know already sets me apart from a number of teachers. And then also doing it with your nostril is different than doing it with the lower abdomen, for example. Even if your breath is going one breath a minute, you can feel if the lower abdomen is opening and closing like this with big movements. You can feel that slow movement happening over the course of 60 seconds because it's a lot of movement as opposed to this tiny movement you're getting on the nostril. The amount of awareness you need to bring to the nostril to feel those movements, probably, I don't know how to describe this to you guys, but you're going to be able to feel the movement of blood, the movement of almost like the almost electrical feelings from the nervous system or what have you, and those will be more intense than the breath at that point. So you could turn your attention to those sensations, but then you're not really following the breath anymore. Do you understand what I mean? So from a pedagogical standpoint, from the point of view of training people in order in terms of certain skills, some of you have probably wondered why I don't spend more time on the breath. And because once you have the basic skill of keeping your mind somewhere and you have this extra tool where you can pull the attention in very quickly, there are other tools that are much better for developing concentration, deepening concentration, that have 14 other benefits as opposed to just sort of brute force keeping your mind on the breath. So this is why I move from the breath to body scanning, and then from body scanning into something like Mahamudra. Because Mahamudra is then giving you global insight, let's say, into the components making up your actual being, which is a much more profound practice to be developing in terms of concentration than just following your breathing. I mean, rats are breathing, you know? Dogs living on the street are breathing, and they're probably aware of their breathing, but they're not aware of the entire sphere of their 6 senses. They're not aware of their internal mind. They're not aware of the contents of their mind. They're not able to make the content stop and to look at the mind directly. So these are much more profound skills than being aware of your breath. And I don't mean to demean the breath, even though I am being a little funny about it just for fun. Breath practice is really incredible. And there are so many layers, so many things you can do with the breath. But what is so much more profound is gaining insight into who and what you really are by looking at the components that make up your being, which is why we move in this progression uh, towards those kinds of capabilities. And then, in the same way that, how do I put this? I'm sorry that I'm being so halting. It's just I'm debating how much I should say from experience and how much I should say from the point of view of just saying that other people have experiences. If you hold certain vows, you're not supposed to say too many good things about yourself. And if you do, also it interferes with your practice because you're using your mind to train your mind. So if you start getting arrogant and weird about things, then it can interfere with your practices. So I'll say this: it's actually not that difficult to get your breathing down to somewhere between 1 breath a minute and 3 breaths a minute. Relatively speaking, that's not a very difficult thing to do. In particular, relative to being able to get your mind to take in the entirety of your visual awareness while walking, taking the entirety of the auditory awareness while walking and having the vision open, taking in the entirety of tactile awareness while the vision is open and the hearing is open while walking. And in addition to that, listening to somebody and having a conversation so that mental content is appearing, but that mental content isn't pulling you out of a non dual experience of vision, hearing, and tactile sensation, right? Relatively speaking, having a mind that is calm enough when you're seated on your cushion to get the breathing down to be very slow or even to almost stop relative to being able to generate really good concentration in the midst of ordinary activity. It's a very there's a big skill gap between the two. Does that make sense? And the profundity of the second one is much greater than the profundity of the first. And so I try not to spend too much time telling people about all the weird stuff that happens when you train in concentration, like, I don't know, the breathing slowing down and this and that, unless it's part of a particular practice you're doing. Because, yeah, eh, you might lose track of time, but you might have the breath slow down or stop for periods of time. You might have as somebody said in the chat, who was that? Oats. You might see light. If you do vision, the opening the visual gate, you'll see white light and you'll see gold light. And you'll see things glowing. Everything in the visual field will start to glow. A very common experience. You know? And it's just sort of normal. It's like, I don't know how to describe it to you. That this is just something that comes up when you do the practice, but it's not the point of the practice. Okay. Uh, Hopefully some of those ramblings help. Really, the big point is that there are all sorts of signs that your concentration is getting better, but there's not too much reason to focus on all of that. Over the long run, the signs that you're getting better are that your negative emotions are becoming less, your positive mental states are becoming more, your ability to generate the mental states you intended to generate becomes better, faster. It comes on time. It arrives on time and it leaves on time. You know, as one of my teachers said, that's how you can identify a great bodhisattva. They turn up on time and they also leave on time. All right, let me get through a couple questions and we'll do some practice. Uh, Sometimes, right. Yeah, I just addressed the light question. Okay, in terms of effort, in the context of training and meditation, effort can come about in two main ways. If you look at the commentarial tradition coming out of the Bhavanakrama way of describing the training and concentration. The first is that it comes about through becoming convinced this is worth doing. If you think this is worth doing, then you'll have effort in doing it. If you don't think it's worth doing, you won't do it. Your practice will wax and wane. Sometimes you'll sit down, sometimes you won't sit down, right? You'll go back and forth. So this actually has to do with basically, to put it in modern terms, it has to do with the why. Why am I doing this? What's at stake? Is there anything important at stake in this activity, or is there not? So, one of the exercises that you're meant to do to help you build up effort is what I put under Foundation 5, which is maybe a little bit backwards, depending on who you ask, right? I put it at the end of 5 other things where you're training in meditation already. But you do a bunch of rumination meditation on the fact that there are huge benefits to training in concentration, and there are huge downsides, huge negative consequences to not training in concentration. And when you've become actually convinced of this, not sort of like, yeah, I intellectually agree, yeah, that makes sense, but where the emotional power of that attitude fills you up in the same way that anger or lust or anything else fills you up and actually motivates you to do something, right? You get really angry with some news story you saw on your phone and you throw it onto the bed, you know? Whatever. Until those emotions are powerful enough that it makes you do something. That's what you're cultivating. Because emotional power, emotional force that's strong enough to get you up and going is what's required for you to exert enthusiastic effort with vigor and energy. Do you see it? So you become enthusiastic about doing it and do it with great force and great energy because you're convinced that the reasons for doing it are really really good, and the reasons and the reasons for doing it are really really good, meaning the benefits of it are really good and the faults or downsides of not doing it are really bad. So to put it in hopefully 2 minutes or less so we can get into our actual practice, I usually frame this in terms of 3 things. Isn't it true that if your mind is out of control, that you're going to get less of what you want out of your life? Because you've missed out on stuff because you couldn't generate the willpower you wanted to, haven't you? Isn't that true? Or you've hurt opportunities that you could have had because you got too frustrated, too angry, too attached to some other temporary thing to get the thing you really wanted. Isn't that true? So for you, having a mind that's out of control means that you get less of what you want in a totally conventional sense. Secondly, isn't it true that if your mind is out of control, you're going to hurt more people that you care about? Isn't that true? That if you get angry, you say stuff that hurts people that you care about in ways that you didn't want to hurt them. That's true, isn't it? Isn't it also true that if your lust gets out of control, you're going to end up chasing that lust and hurt people that you care about with your lust? So, not just anger, but also desire. Your jealousy. Doesn't your jealousy sometimes hurt people that you would have preferred not to hurt? That's true, right? Your arrogance, your pride. Doesn't your pride sometimes stop you from both getting stuff for yourself that you wanted, right? Because you don't have the ability to humble yourself to go get the information or go get the training or go get this, or you can't make yourself small enough to think of yourself going and getting the help that you need. So you miss out on stuff because of your arrogance. But also you hurt other people because the people that rely on you now, because you have this arrogance, you don't become the person you could have been to benefit them more. But also you hurt them because you want to keep them smaller than you. Terrible, this arrogance. Terrible. And then finally, isn't it true if you're a spiritual person that most world religions, especially the ones coming out of Asia and the Himalayan regions, but most world religions, you need a good character. You need a mind that's under control, that's heading in the direction of virtue to get the highest results of those systems. So isn't it true that you won't get the highest results of these systems if you don't have your mind under control? So personally, the consequences are terrible if you don't do your training. Interpersonally, in terms of others and how you interact with others, the results are much worse. And spiritually, religiously, in terms of the outcome you get as a religious person, much worse if your mind is out of control. So you think like this, looking at the faults of not training in concentration. Wow, if I don't get my mind under control, I'm going to hurt myself and miss out on stuff that I want. I'm going to hurt people I care about. and they're not going to get as much as they want, and I don't get the results of my religious life at the highest level that I could have gotten. That's horrible. That's absolutely atrocious. I don't want to live. I don't want that life. I don't want that life at all. And when you really feel that, I don't want this, I don't want that, then you just hold that mental state. I don't want that outcome. I better do my practice. You marinate in that feeling until it's powerful enough to motivate you to do something. And then likewise, you think about the benefits. Isn't it true if your mind's under control, blah, 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 you get benefits for you? Yes. If you're not an angry, arrogant prick, isn't it true? You're probably going to get more opportunities at work. If you're not completely self absorbed and only care about yourself, probably you're going to put in more time, energy, effort, detail, blah, blah, blah at work, which means you're probably going to be the one who advances in your career instead of the other person. you know, nepotism notwithstanding. Secondly, you'll benefit other people in your life because if you have better qualities and your mind is under control, now the other people around you will benefit even more because you're less of a problem and you're more of a help. Isn't that true? Likewise, finally, the spiritual and religious angle, all of these systems from the Himalayas and a few of the ones from the Abrahamic tradition and so forth say if you want the final results of all these systems, you need to transform your mind. You need to train your mind and gain access to more of what you are as a being and look inside and see what the truth is, et cetera, right? So if that's true, you get that. If you train in concentration, you get this benefit, the ultimate one, the religious one. Incredible, right? So likewise, when the feeling comes up, wow, I get all this benefit for me. I get all this benefit for the people I care about. And I get the final benefit of the highest religious accomplishments if I really put my heart into this. That's incredible. I want that. I really want that outcome. I really don't want this outcome. I'm going to do my practice. And when that resolve comes up as a strong emotion, an actual feeling that's powerful in the same way that outrage is powerful, that deep lust is powerful, that overwhelming envy is powerful, when a powerful feeling comes up that makes you want to actually do something, then you just hold it with concentration. Yeah. And then as you get familiar with that emotion and that attitude, then it starts to come up by itself. And that attitude then creates enthusiasm because you're going, man, look at all these benefits I get and look at all the stuff I get to, all the trouble I get to avoid if I do this. This is fantastic. Like, let's go do some practice, you know? Let's get after it. So that's how you develop enthusiasm in the beginning. Now, as you advance, you gain actual capability in meditation and you start to see the benefits of meditation from firsthand experience. And then that becomes the basis where you're going, wow, look at these benefits I have in my hand. And look how bad it would be if I didn't have these benefits in my hand. Incredible. I'm gonna keep cracking on with this. I'm gonna keep going with this. See what I mean? So this then is giving you energy, vigor, enthusiasm to carry on with the efforts that are required to do this particular practice. And then uh, there are all sorts of other aspects to training and a joyous effort. You know, some is I think the effort of doing what you're supposed to do, and the effort of avoiding what you're supposed to avoid, and then the effort of benefiting others. Right. So then there are various contemplations and so forth for each of these aspects. Okay. Abhishek, thought we were going to learn about the force. That's very expensive. The force training classes is $5,000 a month. You can join that if you'd like, but it's very expensive. Okay. So many questions. Oh, we'll talk about that on the call, Blue Eyes. We'll talk about questions related to observations and so forth. Abhishek, yeah, we'll talk more. Uh, just send me a private message on on the Discord, and we can talk about your personal situation a bit if you'd like. Joking aside, it's gotten more natural, but my mind was trying to control it. Yeah. Okay. So about controlling the breathing, for this style of practice, remember the instructions. Place your mind on this patch of skin. In order to control your breathing, you have to put your attention on the diaphragm because the diaphragm has to pull down like this at a different rate than it would do naturally for you to control how slowly and quickly the breath is going, which means that part of your attention is down in your diaphragm going like this, and part of your attention is here. So that's not the instructions. The instructions are put your mind on the breath and the counting. That's your only task. Yeah? Okay. Similar lights. So yeah, yeah. Seeing light is very common when training in concentration. Um, Maluk, I generally feel like sitting up is a lot harder rather than laying down. We can talk more about that, Maluk. Uh, Once you gain a little bit of, so in the beginning, it might be easier to lay down because it's less demanding on your attention to lay down and not have to do anything with your body. You don't have to focus on your body at all. You can just focus on the thing you're trying to do with your attention. So in the beginning, that can help you develop mental stability. The trouble is, the second problem you have in meditation is your mind then, uh, once it's stable, begins to get distracted by the fact that it's calm, and part of your attention starts looking at the fact that the mind is calm, and this causes an effect that the great texts on meditation call sinking or laxity. And laxity means that your mind is actually becoming stupider. You're becoming dumber. Which is why if you sit down and you do this for a long time, you'll start forgetting things. You won't be able to follow conversations. The information that used to come to you really quickly when you needed it sort of takes a long time to come when it doesn't come when you need it, etc. So it's really bad from the point of view of the classics to sit in a state of dullness. The other side effect of dullness is if you stay in a dull state for long enough while trying to meditate with quotation marks, because that's not meditation, you fall asleep. So it's really important. It's really important to understand what the steps and stages of meditation training are and what the main problems are that come up at different stages of that training, and then to know how to address those problems as they come up so that you're not cultivating states of mind that actually aren't benefiting you, right? So hopefully, if you hang around for a bit, we'll go into more detail on that over the course of time. But the way that I teach the techniques that I teach, in the order that I teach them, in the way that I teach them, is meant for you to overcome those problems, even if I don't tell you what they are. If I never mention to you what the process of training concentration is, and you just did my system, you'll overcome those problems one by one because I've designed the system that way, because not everyone wants to be a scholar. Okay. Uh, right. I think about a variety of meditation, or how to think about variety in meditation and sustaining motivation. Um, I'll have to circle back on that, Lang. I'm not sure what you mean by variety in meditation. Um, Sustaining motivation comes from thinking about, in my opinion, you need to understand the whole process. So that's an academic endeavor. You need to just study the whole process of training in meditation and be convinced it is a real thing that you can do. And then you need to be convinced that the benefits are worth the work and that the downside of not doing it is real and consequential, and that you don't want to live your life that way at the end of the day. Do you use desire to one day extinguish it? Yeah, exactly right. So that's the way the Buddha describes it, is that you cultivate desire that is so powerful, it's like a person whose hair has caught on fire. And every ounce of them is trying to find some way to put out the fire on top of their head. He said this is the amount of power and force you need in your desire, because your ordinary desires are doing the same thing in the opposite direction. So you need to meet that totally confused desire with great force headed the other way. Otherwise, it's not strong enough. Okay, doesn't one at some point have to leave behind physical awareness of the body to progress? How does one do that without falling asleep? Yeah, okay. It's really good questions today, but so many of them have come in, I'm worried we won't get to the practice. So that'll be the last one, okay? Let's see. So Sarah, in the progression that I teach, so we start with the breath because if you do it properly, that works really well to start pooling all your awareness, all the bandwidth of your awareness, because your awareness is sort of spread out now between five senses and your mind and your mental content. It's all spread out. So you're trying to grab all of that bandwidth and pool it into one activity. Breath, counting. Here's the activity. So not just the breath, but breath and counting, right? That's the activity. Then once you have that skill, then you do body scanning so that the mind gets really calm, extremely calm. But then you're going to have the problem, as somebody pointed out in the chat, that you start falling asleep. The mind starts to get dull because the mind is now really calm. So the way that I teach body scanning is meant right from the beginning to counteract that effect so that the mind stays highly alert and awake while also becoming quite calm, so that you're balancing this problem out of the system as early as possible. And then finally, you're then working with the five external senses, which, by the way, if you look closely at them, don't exist the way that they seem to exist when you're not looking closely at them. Consciousness is defined as that which is clear and knowing, right? And awareness is a formless thing. And awareness isn't located in any particular location in space in the way that it seems to be located in space in that way when all of your concepts are involved. And it's a bit hard to get into this, but we did it yesterday. So if you watch yesterday's stream, Sarah, you'll see what I mean. When you talk about what it would be like, for example, if you were visualizing an apple, and here are my five external senses, and I pull the awareness inside the mind so that all that I'm seeing is the apple, right? There's no body, there's no visual, et cetera, et cetera. So I've taken all of this attention, I'm visualizing the apple, and I pull my awareness inside so that that's all that's appearing in the entire universe, according to me, is this object, right? Now, what does this mind look like? Because it has no location in space according to itself. It's not seeing anything, it's not hearing anything, right? So here's the image. Now, the practice that I actually teach isn't visualizing something. It's turning the mind this way, so to speak. You pull all the awarenesses inside, and now I'm observing whatever happens to appear there until it stops appearing. And now I'm just looking at consciousness itself, which once again is formless, colorless, tasteless, etc., etc., etc. So you are beginning to go beyond the body in the process, even of becoming aware of your senses. That becomes clear if you train long enough, but in a strange sort of way. But especially when you start talking about meditating on consciousness itself, which is very difficult. A lot of systems say, "Oh, just start by observing your thoughts," and I think that's humbly. I think because there are some very great teachers that teach that way. I think that's extremely difficult as an approach because you have no idea what your mind is doing. You have so little awareness of what your mind is doing. You think you're sitting there observing your thoughts, and your mind is just running around and having a field day in the five external senses. A tiny bit of it is over here watching the contents of consciousness. Most of it is just running around the five senses, like going absolutely insane. And some of it is here with the mental content. And if this is my central mind, right? Some of it is here. So your mind is just sitting there going like this, freaking out. You have no clue where your attention is. And the idea that your mind, in the midst of freaking out and going all over the place in terms of the five senses and generating mental content at a breakneck speed, the great texts say that you generate 64 mental events per second. 64 mental events per second. The idea that you're just going to follow the flow of 64 mental events per second as the mind is running around and doing stuff, I think is actually impossible. You're not going to do that as a beginner. You have no chance of doing that. And if you're sitting there thinking you're doing that, you're probably wasting huge amounts of time, even if you sit there for 2 hours. In retreat, it's different because you're settling the mind down over the course of 2 or 3 days. But from day to day, you're stirring the mind up and it is absolutely going nuts. And then you're sitting there going like this for 2 hours, which isn't concentration, isn't the right order of mental factors to develop concentration, because what you're doing with this is you're trying to develop what's called introspection, the ability to see what the mind is doing and see the quality of the mind that is meditating. That has to come after the mind is stable. Once the mind is stable, then you can increase the awareness of what the mind is doing and see what it's doing. That's called introspection or vigilance, or there's a number of different terms. Meta awareness, which is kind of a new term. I don't actually like it that much, even though it works quite well. So the way that I teach, you develop all of the skills that lead to you being able to pull all of this bandwidth or as much as you can into consciousness and observe mental content. And once you can do that, it naturally starts to fade and become less and less, and you become aware of what your mind is. So this is the way that I teach it, and you do go beyond your body with that practice. I mean, your mind isn't your body, and it doesn't look anything like your body. And one of my students who's getting some taste of what it might be like to meditate on consciousness is starting to say the right things. Where they're like, I'll tell you guys this, then we'll do our practice. But they said, can you give me some hint, sort of like what you grab onto to meditate on the mind? They go, I get when you're like meditating on vision, you're kind of grabbing onto this or that. And I said, the fact that you can't find something to grab onto is consciousness. Because consciousness is formless. It doesn't have a color. It doesn't have a shape. It doesn't have a size. It doesn't have a smell. Doesn't have a taste. Doesn't have a tactile sensation. It doesn't look like anything. It doesn't sound like anything. It's like empty space that knows things. It's like empty space that gives rise to stuff and is aware of or experiences stuff. That's what mind is like. So mind of itself, there's nothing to grab onto. It's like trying to grab onto the air in the room. But even subtler than that, because the air in the room is something in space. Do you understand? And I'm not being mystical. This is very practical description. No. That's not even void yet. That's even the worst part of it. The emptiness or voidness is the ontology, the nature of the existence of consciousness. We're talking about the conventional qualities of consciousness. This is just the ordinary conventional nature of consciousness. This isn't even the emptiness or selflessness or voidness of consciousness. This is like, by comparison, this is like 101, and that's like PhD. And already it's like, already it's so subtle, so difficult. So my consciousness is like completely empty space with nothing to grab onto whatsoever that gives rise to stuff and is aware of the stuff that it has given rise to. That's it. So meditating on consciousness is extremely difficult. And meditating on the content of consciousness, likewise, think about it. If you could draw your attention in and the body turned off in terms of tactile awareness, sound turned off, smell turned off, vision turned off, hearing turned off, and you were visualizing an apple, it would be like there was an apple, wouldn't it? It'd be like there was an apple floating in absolutely empty space, extending in every direction. You understand? Because there's no body there, there's no other points of reference in the mental sphere whatsoever other than this apple. So it's like an apple existing in infinite empty space in every direction. That for some reason is being experienced. And the sneaky part is, here's the mind generating the thing, but the mind generating the thing, follow me here. The mind generating the thing is doesn't have any obvious qualities whatsoever. It's just the thing that happens to be generating the apple. So, in a sense, I'm putting my hand back here to give you something to grab onto, but it's as if the apple is here in empty space by itself, and it's being experienced by the space that it's in. In other words, it's non dual with the thing generating the experience of it. It's not two things, but it's also not one thing, because you can have a mental life that doesn't include a visualized apple. Okay, let's do some practice. Oh, what kind of practice do we do after this talk? Everyone's like, let's do meditation on consciousness now. But unfortunately, you can't. You can't jump to the end of the you can't jump to the end of the process, unfortunately. I wish you could. If there was a way that I knew of that we could all just jump, like sort of leapfrog over to that and have that experience today, we would do it, because uh, it's fantastic. And this is why I sometimes say, can I repeat all that? Yes. Here we go. You ready? You start with your breath to train in concentration and get the concentration to a minimum level of stability. You train in body scanning in a certain way so that the mind doesn't become less lucid, it becomes more lucid and awake while deepening the concentration. You train in the what I call foundation 4 Mahamudra practice to tame the 5 external senses and pull their activity into the central mind so that you can finally experience what consciousness is. Once you've experienced what consciousness is, then you can do the PhD level work, as someone was saying, of seeing what the nature or the mode of existence of this thing is, which is some of the amongst the final work that is there in Buddhism. What is consciousness like? There's nothing there to grab onto in terms of actual qualities, because the tactile qualities you're familiar with in the external world, colors and shapes, sounds, smells, tastes, and tactile sensations, aren't there in the mental sphere in the same way that they're there in the external sphere. So the mind is basically, you could say, almost like in an abstract space. It doesn't have those qualities of itself. And therefore, if you generate a mental image like of an apple, for example, and you pull the awareness in, it's as if the apple is existing there in empty space that knows the apple. It generates and is aware of the apple as if it's here in empty space, right? And the space itself is generating the experience and having the experience. And then the final thing I teach is, well, you can't do those kinds of practices all the time. So what you can do is rumination meditation, like we did in terms of generating effort to do meditation in general. You can do rumination to change the surface of your mind. All of this content that's on the surface of the mind, you can change it into virtue so that you're not arrogant, you're humble, so that you're not lazy, you have effort, so that you're not stingy, you have generosity, so that you're not an unethical backbiting prick, you're someone that people can rely upon, and so on and so forth. And this reduces the chaos in your life and increases the benefit you produce even when you're not trying to do anything in particular. And it makes all your practices easier because you need to have good character to make a lot of progress in anything, including your practice. Not bad. I think that was 3 minutes. How was that, Purple? You happy? I knew you were joking, but I figured I'd do it anyway because it's good to hear it a couple of times. Uh, uh, there is no comparison whatsoever between a deprivation chamber and this, for what it's worth. Uh, I don't have time to say more because we should do some practice, but again, they're just not, they're not actually comparable. You might have some experiences in a deprivation chamber that are interesting or worth having, but they're actually not comparable things. And the second part of your question, Sarah, in ultra brief fashion, how do you do that without falling asleep or losing all awareness? You have to have a progressive training system that in the beginning creates stability, in the middle creates lucidity, awakeness, and at the end refines your ability to remove subtle problems in concentration until there are no problems in the concentration. Being able to refine those subtle abilities of seeing little micro problems in the meditation and correcting them comes from becoming increasingly aware of the content of consciousness. Huh, interesting. Why is it that at the end of this process I'm having you observe the contents of consciousness? Well, we're at the last thing you need to really see, your consciousness itself, at least in terms of these level of practices. You could do more in tantra, right? But at the level of sutra practice, this is it. So if you become aware of the movements of the subtle stuff happening in your mind, you can fix the last few problems in meditation while also gaining access to the final component making up your being, your human level consciousness. Yeah. So that's how you do it without falling asleep or becoming unaware. Stability, lucidity, subtle problems, perfected concentration, then you're off to the races. Okay. Since we had a fairly good talk, and we did a short rumination on the motivation for meditation, so we did do some meditation practice. We'll just do a bit of intensive breath, if that's okay with everyone, and then we'll call it a day. So intensive breath practice is fairly easy to explain, but it will sound absolutely nuts if this is your first time training in these techniques with me. To briefly justify the technique, if you had 4 days or 3 days or 2 days in retreat to do nothing but ask your mind to gently calm down, then it's going to be quite easy for you to make the mind calm down because you're not stirring it up in between sessions. You're just gently asking it to calm down, calm down, calm down. In real life, you've stirred it up all day and your mind is totally insane. And now you're asking it to calm down right now. But the force of your distractions is really powerful. Your mind is desperately running around between the five senses and rapidly, intensely creating all sorts of mental content. And the force of all of that is really powerful. The great texts like the texts coming from the Bhavanakrama tradition through the Tibetan traditions say the type of attention you need, even if you were going to do this in retreat, by the way, the type of attention you need to overcome this great distraction is called forceful conveying. Forceful conveying. You bring the attention to the object with intense force, powerful force. Okay, so how do we do that? Well, you can do it just brute force. You can do it using the contemplation we had earlier, where you come up with really good reasons why you're doing this practice, and then you use the force of that mind to do the practice. That's a really good method. If you just want to do it brute force, which I think works okay, you do it like this. When you place your mind on you're going to find a patch of skin inside your nose. When you do, every single cell in your body needs to agree that it's time to focus on this patch of skin and to do the counting. Every single thought in your mind needs to agree. The only thing we need to do for the next 5 minutes is be aware of this patch of skin and do counting. All of your emotions need to agree. All we're going to do is focus on the patch of skin and count this thing. So the entirety of your being, everything making you up needs to be in agreement that this is what we're doing and we're going to do it with great force, great effort. One analogy that works quite well, it's a bit antiquated, but it's a bit of fun. There's an analogy like this. There's a man walking with oil in a vessel, and he's approaching a bunch of people that are singing and dancing in a large crowd. And the king's escort is behind him with a sword, and the vessel is so full with oil, it's brimming. And the text says it's like this. If you were to add one more drop, it would spill over the side. Just it's totally brimming. And the king's guard says, "Sir, if you spill even a single drop before that vessel arrives at the palace of the king, I'm going to cut you in two." And the text says, imagine what great force of attention, of effort, of intensity this person is going to provide this task of not spilling the oil, because everything is riding on them not spilling the oil. And they're approaching a circumstance where people are going to be jostling around them. So the chance of spilling it is very high, right? Likewise, the chance of you spilling your attention off the object to your five senses, to your thoughts, blah, 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 very high. But to follow the analogy, you have to think about it like the consequences are basically life and death. The consequences are the rest of your life could be way better than it is, and your spiritual life depends upon you making progress in this, or your life could be way better than it is. And you could have all these benefits that come from this capability, right? The consequences affect everything else you care about, personally, interpersonally, religiously, and spiritually. And therefore, everything is riding on this as if there's someone standing behind you with a sword prepared to cut you in half if you fail. Okay? One more analogy, then we'll get to the practice. This is one that I often give people in private, but no, actually, I'll save that one. I think it's better to deliver it in private. In any case, hopefully that's given you enough to understand the amount of force you need to bring. Okay? So breathe in through the nose naturally. The breath is normal. The mind is intense. Okay? Intensive breath meditation. So breathe in through the nose. Find wherever the sensations are the most. Now, when I say begin, as soon as I say begin with extreme force, extreme decisiveness, put all of your attention from the rest of your body, from the rest of your senses, from your intellectual life, all of your attention on that patch of skin. And the action of counting the breath. So you're going to count from 1 to 7, 7 down to 0. When you hit 0, that's the only time you can move your body. Other than that, 1 to 7, 7 to 1, you stay completely still. Even if you're uncomfortable, grab that attention out of that part of your body and put it where you are. It's 5 minutes. It's a 5-minute practice. So if you're slightly uncomfortable, you can handle it. Okay? Okay. Here we go. Here we go. So breathing in, find a patch of skin. 3, 2, 1, 100%. Begin. Right? One aspect I'd like to add before we wrap up, sugar free reminded me of it. The highest practices of a lot of the Buddhist systems don't actually have to do with completely overcoming your body. They have to do with using the body in a really skillful, powerful way. So your body changes as you train in concentration and you get better at concentration. Your body becomes different than it was before you started because your body and mind reflect each other. And the from what I know of the tantric systems of the Buddhist world, um, there are quite a few practices, for example, where you would spend 2 hours a day working with the body and the breath primarily, and the mind only secondarily in advancing those practices. So, using the body and engaging with the body is extremely important, extremely profound. And in particular, because from a tantric perspective, this particular body as a human being has all of these advantageous elements in it that can allow you to gain access to even subtler parts of your being. When I'm doing this analogy, five external senses, central mind, this is your human mind. According to Buddhist thought, this mind at death will dissolve into a subtler mind down here. So this mind is still your mind, you could say. It's but it's not a human mind. It's a very much subtler component making up your being. And if you can access this one, much easier to access this one. But you actually have to the all of the sort of activity that's associated with this level of consciousness has to dissolve in the same way that the external senses have to dissolve for you to fully access this. For you to fully access this, you need all of this activity to dissolve into the subtler one. To do that, they say in the tantras, all sorts of stuff you can do with your body to help make that happen. So it yes, in an important sense, you're ultimately aiming at the subtlest aspect of your mind, right? But in another important aspect, you could spend years just working with the body and the stuff that you happen to find in the body if you're a good meditator, to be as vague as possible. Uh, and and those are not trivial practices at all. Those are extremely profound practices. One of my teachers went so far as to say you attain enlightenment with your body and your mind, not just your mind. And a Buddha has a body, speech, and a mind. So a Buddha, at least according to the Mahayana, has all of these aggregates, the same aggregates that you have, but a Buddha's aggregates are perfected. A Buddha's components making up their being have been perfected in a way that yours have not been perfected yet. So it's it is true that the sort of I don't know exactly the right terms to use, my friends, but let's say some of the end stage practices have to do with gaining access to the subtlest components that make up your being, be those the human mind or the subtlest aspects making up your mind that normally only occur at death, but can be accessed through tantric techniques. Yes, we're headed that way. But part of the reason we're heading that way Looks like I'm getting a little bit of lag. There we go. Part of the reason that we're heading that way is so that as the mind is reoccurring in this form at some later time or later in this life, etc., that this is now of a different quality. This level of your being and experience is now of a different quality because you've accessed this, because you've done work moving back and forth, because you've incorporated some of the realizations that you've gained at this level of experience down at deeper levels of experience and then come back, etc. So the body is not at all a trivial thing. In fact, one of the tantric vows in Buddhism is not to abandon your body. This is a vow you make if you train in the Tibetan tantras, for example, to not abandon your body. Do animals and so forth have the subtlest components in the same way? They have, if, in terms of this sort of the subtlest mind, yeah, all beings have this subtlest aspect of consciousness. Not all beings have, there are certain other elements that make up your physical existence as a human being that are accessible through training and meditation. Uh, some of those elements are unique to human beings, which is why it's really incredible to be a human being at this time. If you know how to use those things for your practice, even though they're quite those are quite advanced techniques. It's not something you want to jump into because it won't work unless you've done a lot of other things first. So you can't jump to the end. Just like we were talking about with my stuff, you can't just jump to here and have it work. You have to do all the stuff in between. Likewise, the tantric stuff that's in the Tibetan lineages, it only works because you've done a whole lineage of stuff. And that stuff is the engine or the power that makes that tantric stuff work. Right. So that being said, yeah, all beings have these subtlest aspects of consciousness. All sentient beings have that, and it's on that basis that you're able to attain full awakening, Buddhahood, according to Buddhism. Okay, that's all I wanted to say. And yeah, as I've said many times, some of the some of the geniuses of working with the body, the energy system, or the vitality aspect, the stuff that keeps you part of what keeps you alive as a being. Some of those geniuses left behind various tantric techniques. Most of those tantric techniques, including the ones working with the body, in the living lineages of tantra in Japan and in China, I think, also in China, and in Tibet, they're hidden or kept behind empowerment. So you're meant to do a whole lineage worth of stuff and then do those after you're quite experienced. However, some of those same technologies are available without empowerment through systems like 18 Lohan Palm, which I'm working with Neil Ripsky to make more widely available to people. Because quite a few people, I think, would benefit from being able to do a huge amount of the stuff that you do with your body in the tantras, from what I understand of them. Being able to do some of those things at an earlier stage benefits your training and concentration and your health and all sorts of other things. So I'm working with Neil Ripsky on the 18 Lohan Palm online course so that we can bring this sort of stuff to more people. So there's a lineage coming through Shaolin Temple that has huge amounts of this information in it that allow you to make your body more like an accomplished practitioner so that your body is like the result. And then your body starts supporting you attaining the result. Likewise, your energy system, your vitality body, for lack of a better term, changes if you attain certain results in training and concentration. But there are methods to make this more like the result before you have it. And therefore, this then supports the result. So you can start working on different parts of your being and pointing them all in the same direction. So, for anyone who's interested in that and likes that sort of thing, It's one of my things. I do a lot of those practices myself. That's the website, and if you'd like to sign up for it, if you'd like to give it a go, put this code in there when you check out. If you put these codes in when you're checking out on Lohan Palm, then then you get the first 3 months are half off because we're still tweaking some things, and I didn't want people to, and also I want people to try it and see how awesome it is. Anyway, so if you're looking for a way to, because I do all this for free, as you all know, so if you're looking for a way to sort of chip in financially, so I can carry on doing this for free for everybody, you could sign up at Lohan Palm, and part of that goes to Neil because he's an awesome guy. Part of it goes to me because I'm teaching a bunch of the meditation stuff I do incorporated into his Lohan curriculum. That would be a wonderful way to chip in if you guys wanted to do that. And also, I've said before, mostly when I do retreats for meditation, I teach people how to do your retreat at home because there's big benefits to that. But through Lohan, Neil and I are going to start doing retreats where I turn up in person and we train in Lohan stuff, which is really beneficial to be in person for that. And we also do my meditation stuff in person. So if you ever want to actually kind of like meet me and hang out, then probably doing it through the Lohan community will be the best way in the long run for those of you who are interested. And I'd actually like to meet a fair number of you, except for you, that guy over there. Yeah, you. No, not you. You. Uh, okay. Well, I have a phone call with somebody who is a new student in the other course, the Five Foundations course, at 10 o'clock. So I have to hop off, but it's good to see you all. And if you do join the Lohan Palm, if you join that community, also make sure to join the Facebook group. You'll see the links and stuff so that Neil and I can talk with you as you go through the curriculum because huge amounts of detail. If you like stuff like yoga, this has an entire stream that's basically yoga called Doyen. But then on top of that, it has 50 other elements for training your being that go beyond just sort of stretching and strength and a little bit of breath practice, right? Hundreds of other layers that help you develop. Really incredible. It's hard to describe how rich these systems are if you haven't been pretty deep into one of them before. So if you'd like to have some knowledge of this stuff, this is what I'm recommending to most people. Not just because it's my thing, but because uh, I really like Neil. He's a stand-up guy. He has a really rare lineage for this stuff, and if he gets hit by a bus, then it goes out of existence. And I'd prefer it not go out of existence. Um, yeah, and for my students, I'd love to meet a whole bunch of you, and this would be the best way to do it in the long run. So lots of benefits, lots of angles. Okay, I've got to hop off so I can make this phone call, but thank you all for being here. Hope to see you again very soon. Try not to die before I do.